Hey everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday night devotional. Today is February the 3rd, and we are digging into the book of Esther. I hope you've had a great week. Hope that school is going well. Hope things at home are going really well. And I hope you had a great time reading through the book of Esther. It's an exciting book. It's action-packed. There's a thrilling story that runs through the book of Esther. As you're going through the tension between what's going on really grabs you, and you want to know, how is this all going to end? And so what I want to do, I've invited you into my office. You kind of see my books in the background. This is where I do a lot of my studying and my reading and thinking. And so I want today just to kind of walk through and talk about the book of Esther, some things that I saw, some things that I think are neat about the book of Esther, and then one big takeaway, one big point that I think will be helpful. So, the book of Esther follows around just a few main characters. There's Esther, who is a young Jewish woman who's living in Susa. Remember that the Persians took over the land. The Persians, the Mede and Persians took over the Babylonians. And so, Susa was the capital of the Persians. So, Esther is a young woman who lives in Susa. There is King Ahasuerus. He's the king of Persia. There's Mordecai, who is Esther's relative. Very likely that he was her uncle, and he cares for her. And then there's Haman, who is the king's trusted advisor. So the story circles around these four main characters. So it all kind of opens up. Let's just kind of walk through the story a little bit. So King Ahasuerus has this party, and he calls for his wife, Vashti, Queen Vashti, and she's not doing it. She's not coming. He probably wanted her to come and to entertain the guests, and she's probably thinking, I don't want to do that. You can't make me do that. Well, that's the problem in these days. It's not only a wife saying no to her husband, this is a queen saying no to the king, the most powerful man in the nation. And you can't do that. You couldn't do that at this time, because she could have been put to death. In this case, she is just dismissed. She's thrown out. She's no longer a queen. And then there, in turn, happens to be a citywide, nationwide search for a new queen, for a new bride. And out of all the women that is gathered, and all the process of kind of making them beautiful, kind of for this beauty pageant for the king, yes, it's very shallow, but at that time they made her very beautiful, all the women. Out of all the women chosen, Esther is chosen. Esther, this young Jewish girl, is chosen to be the queen of the strongest nation in the world. It's pretty impressive. Well, there's one other thing that takes place in the first two chapters that's really important, and that is Mordecai, Esther's uncle. Mordecai overhears a plot of some men who want to kill the king. And one thing we learn about Mordecai early on is that he's a guy of character. He's a guy you can trust. He's a guy who does the right thing even when it's the hard thing. And so he hears there's a plot to kill the king, and instead of thinking, well, good, they took over us anyway. Well, good, we have to submit to these Persians, and so kill them. No, instead, he reports the plot, and those men are punished, and the king is saved. So Mordecai becomes a hero. It's important, though, an important detail, they write down what Mordecai did in sort of what's kind of like a historical journal, kind of record keeping. This is what took place on this day, and so it is recorded that Mordecai saved the king. Okay, then on Friday we continue the story, and Haman, the king's trusted advisor, is given a promotion, and it's commanded that when Haman comes into the city, everyone's got to bow down. They've got to bow down and pay their loyalties, their allegiance to this mighty Haman. And so everyone does. He comes into town and everyone bows down except for Mordecai. Now, it doesn't expressly say it here, but we can put in the pieces here that the reason that Mordecai does not bow down to Haman is not just that he doesn't like him, but is that, again, Mordecai is a man of conviction, a man of faith. And God's people, we don't bow down to men. We don't worship men or women or leaders. We worship God and God alone. There's only one to whom we bow down, and that's King Jesus. So Mordecai does not bow down. And it's not just that he makes him a little mad, Haman. or just bothers him, oh, he's enraged. He is infuriated with Mordecai, and his rage gets to such a point. His anger builds to such a level that not only does he want to put Mordecai to death, he wants to kill all the Jews altogether. Let's get rid of all the people. That's some intense rage. It can show us, maybe a little side point there, it can show us the danger of out of control anger. If we really lack the control to be able to control our spirit, to hone in our anger, when people upset us, we can find ourselves exploding to some bad conclusions. Exploding in our words, exploding in our actions, exploding in the way that we respond towards others. You ever noticed that before? Someone who has a hard time with their anger, with an anger issue, and something's said to them and they don't take criticism well, and they explode when someone tells them something they don't like. Or they explode when things don't go their way. Well, here's Haman, and the way that his anger explodes is in vengeance against the Jews. And so Haman comes up with this plot, this in his mind carefully concocted plot. He paints the picture that there are some rebellious people in the nation of Susa and the nation of the Medes and the Persians, and these people are a problem. They're going to rise up and they're going to make things difficult for King Ahasuerus. And so he paints the picture that these people need to be destroyed for the safety of the king and his nation. And just kind of leaves it at that. What's known underneath, though, is that the people he's talking about are the Jews. Well, Mordecai learns about this plot. He learns about the plot of Haman to kill all of the Jews. And he sends word to Queen Esther. And he tells her, look, this is what he's planning. He's going to put us all to death. And you've got to take it to the king, and you've got to tell him. You've got to tell him what he has planned. Queen Esther is caught in a difficult place. Now, the king loved her. The king loved Esther. The king just adored her. But there's a problem. Remember that the king is most important. He is over all. He is the highest of the highest on the earth. And so when the king is in his court, when the king is on the throne, unless he calls you, you can't interrupt him. You can't just come in and say, hey, I want to talk to you. Hey, I got something I want to bring to your attention. Even if you're his wife, even if you're the queen. And so if the king had not sent for Esther, she couldn't just barge in and say, hey, I've got something to say. No, she had to wait to be called. She had to wait to be summoned. And in the case of this issue with Haman's plot, if she waited, she might be too late. And so if she waited, she could wait too long. That's problem number one. But on the other side of things, if she barged in, if she came in without being invited, she could risk being punished, being dismissed as a queen, or even worse, being put to death. And so literally she had to risk putting her life on the line to save the lives of her people. This is where we find one of the most incredible statements in all the Bible when it says in Esther chapter 4, when it says down in verse 14, if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. Who knows whether you have not obtained royalty for such a time as this? In other words, what Mordecai is saying is, Esther, if you don't, someone will. God will raise up someone to save us. But think of this, Esther. Maybe you are in this position with this opportunity for such a time as this. Oof. Isn't that amazing? We're going to come back to that here in just a minute. All right. Well, Esther then begins to make this plan. She decides to hold a royal banquet and to hold a royal banquet and to invite the king and Haman along to this banquet. And so she does it. She goes before the king, and the king accepts her. The king welcomes her in, and she invites the king to come to this banquet. He and Haman, and Haman's so flattered. Wow, the queen is inviting me to this banquet. I must be really important. Now remember, Haman just got a raise, a promotion in chapter 3, so he's starting to get higher and higher up. So he got this promotion in chapter 3. Queen Esther is inviting him to the banquet now in chapter 5. Ooh, things are getting really good. And then the king in chapter 6 begins to, he wants to honor Mordecai for Mordecai saving him. For Mordecai saving him from the plot that was against him. You see, the night before, the king could not sleep. The night before, the king had a hard time sleeping, and so in order to try and get to sleep, like a lot of people, sometimes you play with your phone if you can't sleep. Sometimes if you can't sleep, you just open a book and you read. He didn't have TV back then. You turn on TV. So he opened the book, and it was a scroll of the records, and he came down to where he found that Mordecai saved his life, and he realized, I never did anything to thank him. I never did anything to honor this man who saved my life. And so he prepares in his mind to do something to honor Mordecai. And so he invites Haman in to talk about what to do to honor such an important person, but he doesn't tell him that it's Mordecai. He just simply says, what should I do, Haman? What should I do to honor someone who's really deserving, who's really important? And Haman thinks it's him. He thinks he's talking about him, about Haman. And so he says, well, you ought to parade him around town, and you ought to make him sit on the nice horse, and you ought to make a big to-do about this person. He's thinking, man, the king's really going to make me look good. And so the king says, done. Those things are to be done. We're going to have a special celebration of this person, an honor of this person, and he will be paraded through town. And then comes the stab to Haman when he realizes it's not him, it's Mordecai, of all people, his worst enemy. And the insult to injury is that not just is Mordecai the one that's going to be honored, but that Haman must be the one to lead him through this honor, through the celebration. Well, Haman has just had it. That just was the last straw. And he goes home and he's undone in his anger. And by his wife's prompting, in that rage, he builds a gallows. And his intention is, when the law goes through with the king signing it to kill all the Jews, Mordecai is going to be hung on Haman's gallows. I will kill him at my own house. Well, this is a big plot twist, because what do you do? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to God's people? Well, this is when things change. It all comes to a head in chapter 7. It's the day of Esther's banquet. The king arrives. Haman arrives. Haman believes that this is going to be yet another opportunity to be praised and promoted and honored. And with the king present, she drops the bomb. She tells him, my life is at risk. And not just my life, the life of all of my people. And the king says, well, what's going on? How is your life at risk? And she says, your trusted advisor, Haman, is seeking to put me to death. And the king becomes enraged. He now sees through Haman's deceitful plot to kill the Jews, realizing that his own wife now would be at risk. And so the king leaves. Well, as he leaves, Haman realizes, what is going on? This is not at all what I thought is going to happen. And so he grabs for Esther to beg for mercy, pleading with her to spare his life. And the king comes back in, seeing him grabbing for Esther, and he comes undone. He orders for Haman to be killed there, taken home and hung on his own gallows. And he promises to save Esther and her people. Isn't that amazing? In a moment, when things seem to be hanging on the thread, when it seems like Haman's evil plot is going to be fulfilled, God worked through Esther, God worked through Mordecai, and the people are spared. And in fact, it's not just that the people are spared. What happens then going forward, when you look at chapter 8 and 9 and 10, as the story ends, Mordecai is promoted. Mordecai is given a great promotion. And then Mordecai he's promoted to Haman's position, and he is allowed to write a different law, a different edict, and he writes one that protects his people, that protects the Jews, rather than one that harms them. And then in the end, the last two chapters describe the Jews rising in strength to defeat their enemies, and then there is a feast that is created to honor Queen Esther. It's a beautiful end to a beautiful story, to an amazing story. Now, one thing that people talk about here is that you don't see the name of God mentioned in this story. You don't really hear anyone talking about God or mentioning God. Did you see God through the story of Esther? Did you notice his fingerprints throughout this story? Let me trace some with you. Notice the things that happened, that just so happened to take place the way that they needed to in order for things to take place, in order for the conclusion to happen. Esther just happened to become queen. Mordecai just happened to advise her to keep her ethnicity a secret, chapter 2, 19 and 20. Mordecai happened to hear an assassination plot against the king, to report it in time, and that incident is written in the Persian Book of Records. Haman happened to plot to kill all the Jews and to kill Mordecai on his own gallows. The king stayed up one night to read about Mordecai and decided to reward him the next day, the same day that Haman sought to kill him. Esther found favor with the king when she appeared uninvited. The king listened to Esther and gave her favor and changed his laws on her behalf. Mordecai is placed in Haman's position and is allowed to write the changes in the law. I mean, do you see all through this book, God is working, God is active. He allowed his people to be in the right place at the right time in order to save his people and to accomplish his will. And so no, we don't read of the name of God. We don't see God being mentioned by people specifically, but there's no question that God was active during this time and in his people. Because of that, his people are spared and they are saved. Now, there's one thought I want to leave you with out of this incredible, incredible story. It goes back to what we read in chapter 4 of the book of Esther, chapter 4 and verse 14. You know, this whole quarter, one thing we're seeing is how courage is required to do the right thing. How faith in God often requires us to have courage in God. Courage to do the things that God expects us to do. Whether if it's Daniel and his friends, the three friends who stood whenever everyone else kneeled, or Daniel who ate the food against the king's orders, or Daniel who prayed when it was against the king's law, or in the days of Zerubbabel and the people continuing to build the temple when the threat from enemies outside were telling them not to, or Ezra calling out the people who were guilty in sin of marrying people outside of the land. It took a lot of courage to speak the truth. Or even the prophets we read about in the past 2 weeks about Zechariah and Haggai. The courage to speak up and say, build the temple, get back up and do the right things. That took a lot of courage. Sometimes the right thing is the hard thing. It's a difficult thing. Sometimes in doing the right thing, you stand alone. One thing we learn from Esther is that sometimes if we stop and think about it, just like Queen Esther, who knows if we have been placed in certain times, at certain places, in certain positions for just a time as this. Who knows? Who knows? Have you thought about that? Maybe the reason you're at the school that you're in, or the co-op you're in, the sports team you're in, the band or the choir or the club that you're in. Who knows, maybe out of all the cities in this country that you are in this city and that's a part of this local church, maybe you were here for just a time as this. Have you thought about that? That maybe the reason you are around the people that you are in your neighborhood, in this church, in your clubs, in your school, is for you to make a difference. That your example, that your bright light, that you doing the right thing, even if no one else is, that you speaking comforting, kind words of truth, that you showing people what it means to pray, to believe in God, and to be serious about faith, that you showing people what it means to love your neighbor and to love those even if they're different than us, that you are here to make a difference in the lives of others. Never overlook the good that you can do right where you are. I want to show you one example of this. I keep it here in my office. I call it my kindness box. And so every kind card, every kind letter, every kind picture I get from someone, I put it in a box, and it's getting kind of full right now. It's overflowing. But every time someone writes me something kind and considerate, I put it in the box. You know, I thought about this box when thinking about this passage. Some of you just wrote this because you were just being kind. You were just being thoughtful. Because I have some of your cards and your notes. You just thank you for a sermon, thank you for the class, or just thank you for being you. And all you did was you just wrote it because you wanted to be kind and to be encouraging. But I'll tell you, some of these came at just the right time. There were times that maybe I was feeling real discouraged. I was feeling kind of beat up, just feeling down and low. But when this card came, I read it, and it lifted me up. It really helped me. It gave me the strength and the encouragement to just get back to the work, knowing that there's some people who really care about me. And because they care about me, because I see the good that's being done, I can keep on doing this good work. Your encouragement helped me. It helped me at just the right time. That can happen all the time. You just doing the right thing. You speaking words of truth. You sharing what you've studied and what you've learned. You inviting a person to a Bible study or just a study with you or read the Bible with you. You writing cards or encouraging notes. You just sitting next to someone, sitting next to an older member, or just going over and saying, "Hi, how are you doing today?" You setting the example in the Bible class of someone who has their notes prepared. You're asking questions. You're engaged. You're paying attention. You at sports, at practice, or on the game, you working hard and playing hard and being a good teammate and encouraging your teammates. Refusing to cheat. No, you're playing hard and doing it the right way. You studying hard at school, not cheating on the test, but you're showing your friends a good example of what it means to be a good student. All of those are ways that you can make a tremendous difference today. And who knows that maybe just today, by the way that you lived, by the good things you did, that you made a difference in the life of someone at just the right time. For such a time as this. Listen, when you face hard times in life, difficult times, don't look for ways out. Don't look for the way out. Look for ways that God can use you for good. Queen Esther could have looked for the way out. Why me? There's a lot of other people who could do this. There's a lot of people who could step up and save the day. There's a lot of risk. Her life was on the line, but she chose to do the right thing, and because of it, the nation was saved. There may be people who need you today. They need your example. They need your encouragement. They need to see you walking with Jesus. And because of that, maybe they'll come to believe. Maybe they'll learn to be kind. Maybe they'll change the way that they're living. Maybe even some here in the church will see you and they'll be more inspired to walk with Jesus. They'll get more serious about Bible class. Maybe they'll feel uplifted because of you. Never overlook the good that you can do. If God can use Esther's to save nations at just the right times, then God can use you today, even as a young person, and He can use you to make such great big differences in the lives of others. Because I'm telling you, you're making a difference in my life. You've helped me, and I know you can help others too. For just a time as this, we do the right thing. We live the right way every time, every day. Because who knows, maybe we are where we are for just a time as this. Even if it's just one soul that we can help and one soul that we can strengthen. Maybe even if it's just one person we can point to Jesus. Wouldn't that make all the difference? Isn't that an amazing thought? Who knows? Maybe God has placed you exactly where you are for just a time as this. So don't stop living like Jesus. Don't stop doing the right thing. Don't give up those small acts of kindness, those little acts of service, because who knows what great big differences they can make in the lives of others. Thanks so much for studying with me and walking through the book of Esther. I hope it has helped you and has left you with some inspiring and encouraging thoughts as we put this to a close. I hope you have a great week, a great next few days at school, and I look forward to worshiping with you in a couple of days come Sunday. Have a great night. We'll see you soon.